everyone, welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. How's your dystopia going? How's your slow dystopia? That's really what it is. I was talking to a friend earlier and I'm like, you should trademark that term. Has someone already done it? Someone's had to. Same way someone's probably already come up with the cryptocurrency keeper. Made a t-shirt of the Crypt Keeper, but he's into Bitcoin or some shit like that. Hey, enough of this. Great episode today. This is McKenzie Chinn. If you don't know who McKenzie is, let me read you her bio right now. Originally from Fort Washington, musician, poet, and actor McKenzie Chinn is a true triple threat. As an actor, she has appeared on Fox's Empire and The Big Leap, is a 2021 fellow in the Sundance Directors Lab, and wrote, produced, and acted in the film Olympia, which made its debut at the 2018 LA Film Festival. As a poet, her work has appeared in numerous publications and has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize. And as a musician, she is part of the Growing Concerns Poetry Collective, whose second album, Big, Dark, Bright Futures, was released last fall. Can't recommend it enough. That is why I wanted to talk to McKenzie in the first place. And man, we get into some deep stuff here. I will say this. Let me preface this with a very short story about when I used to work at NYU. I worked in their development department, which in Hollywood, a development department is a group of people that take an idea from conception all the way to, hopefully, an actual finished TV show that you see on the air. However, outside of Hollywood, in universities and such, development departments are the fundraising arm. And when I worked in NYU's fundraising development department, I was just someone's admin assistant or executive assistant or something like that. But the part of the development department that I worked in was me and mostly black women who were very nice to me, but mostly kept me at arm's length until one day when I had printed out a picture of Naomi and myself and put it on my desk. And that's when their attitude changed. And they're like, oh, he's not just some white dipshit. I mean, look, just because I have a black wife doesn't mean I couldn't be just some white dipshit. But I got some of those same vibes from McKenzie. Again, very nice, but I think there was a little bit in the beginning of, all right, another white dipshit. I'll put on the kid gloves for him. You know, there's not a great way in an interview sometimes to be like, well, I have read bell hooks without coming off like a dipshit. So, but as the interview progressed, I mean, it starts off very interesting, but I think we get into like some very deep stuff about vulnerability that I thought was really, really interesting. And I am just a big fan of McKenzie's poetry. And I'm excited to see more of her stuff, more of her acting work too. But yeah, this was a goddamn delight. I hope you enjoy this episode. And if you do, you want to check out other episodes, sometimes what I do here in the beginning is a little recommended if you like my talk with McKenzie. Why? What about when I talk to the wonderful Samus, Jean Grey? Ooh, what about last week's episode with Ramona Gonzalez, aka Night Jewel? That was a really good one, too. So check those out. If you like what you hear, you can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast from. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Andy Beckerman. And coming up next week, episode 500. That's a big deal, right? I talked to someone who has co-created some of my favorite shows from the UK. I won't say anything more than that, so it'll be a surprise. So stay tuned for that. But for now, let's talk to McKenzie. I don't know if you have that with other people, with people at all, period. But the minute like someone's doing a favor for me, I feel weirdly indebted to them in a way where like I have to discharge that debt in some way.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. And even in instances where I should feel perfectly fine asking for what I need. Like, for instance, I just finished editing a scene from a project associated with the film that I'm working on. And, I was working with my editor and, limited budget, all of that stuff. But, she's, was on board, really invested in the project. And I still felt bad, like asking her for like adjustments to the edit. Like, it's like a basic thing that is part of editing, is part of that, that step of the collaboration. And I was still like, I mean, if you have time, if you want to. So yeah, no, it's definitely something. Yeah, it's something to overcome, especially when you're at the helm of something,
Is that a general thing in your life? Like, are you in general, outside of, let's say, artistic projects, are you in general nervous to ask favors of people or to like have that kind of connection? I mean, I have a weird thought about that. It's like growing up in a kind of like hyper capitalist country where everything is commodified, and therefore like even your emotions are commodified, even if you don't want them to be, that you just because you grow up in this milieu. I hate that word, but I have never,
that's accurate. That's real.
This is like the second interview in a row where like I grasped for something context, I guess. But like, do you like, that's my thought on it. I don't have a better one. I don't know if you've thought about it.
No, I definitely think that's part of it. I think part of it is also just social conditioning. I think when you are a woman, when you're a person of color, I think there's this kind of subconscious sense that like, oh, I have to not make my demands too great or they won't be met, or people or the opportunity might, vanish entirely. Which I think is, I don't think that's, I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to kind of feel a pressure about, even if it may not be entirely accurate all of the time. But I also think I just, something that's really important to me is doing my best to compensate people as best I can, and as fully as I can for the work that they do, especially work that I'm in charge of. And, sometimes I have a budget that can do that. More often than not, there's always more that I want to be able to offer people. So I'm very aware that if I'm not, paying someone what their ordinary rate might be, that there's a limit, there's a limit to what I can ask, because their time is valuable. And I don't want to make them, people who I admire and respect feel like I'm trying to take advantage of their time and their generosity.
Sure. But this seeps into, this goes beyond just like business type stuff. This seeps into like my life. Like having someone do a favor for me, I feel like that. I feel the same stuff. Like it has nothing. It goes beyond this. It just like it's the mindset. I think you're younger than me, but like being a child in the '80s, kind of just like in this. I talk about like Reagan or like Thatcher, depending on where my guest is from, a lot, because I think it really did fuck me up. I think it really did put this kind of I don't want to say like I hate the metaphor that the brain is a computer, but it did like put that kind of software in my brain a little bit.
I do feel like we've been conditioned to feel like so much of our interaction, even on an interpersonal level, is transactional. Like you do this for me, I do that, and it has to even out. Everybody has to have a mutual benefit. And I just think that is such an exhausting model for like engaging with people, especially in interpersonal relationships, because it's not always going to balance out. And we're not commodities at the end of the day, as much as the kind of, current cultural climate leads us to believe that we are. It's definitely something to resist on a daily basis.
Are you a business-minded person? When we were corresponding, it felt very like formal, and I didn't know if that was just I'm a stranger. So like that's why, or if that is just like, well, this is how I correspond.
Wow. Yeah, no, I'm truly not a business-minded person. I like everything I do, and I think the things that are leading me the most are really rooted in just truly feeling like I have something to say and wanting to share it with as many people who may need that thing as possible. But because I'm an independent artist, like I do kind of, I guess, function as, I hate saying that because I'm not a business, but like, I make the decisions, about what projects I move forward on and which I decide not to be a part of. And so there is, I think, a level of, I think there's a professional tone that I do try to strike, especially when I'm just corresponding with new people, people who I don't know them and they don't know me. And also when there are things being exchanged, when there's like agreements being made, I try to actually just be as straightforward and clear as possible because I just think that helps communication so that nothing kind of gets lost in the shuffle. And then, of course, as the relationship develops, then it gets way more chill. But I do think a lot about like, oh, how do I approach this in a way that like that feels professional and like I know what I'm talking about, like I just finished participating in the Sundance Directors Lab, and part of that work was to direct an exercise scene taken from the particular project, the film that the Institute is supporting. So I needed to find a producer to just really help me, pull that together logistically. And, I found myself reaching out to people who I've never met before, who I don't have relationships with. And it was just really important for me to like have all of the information, upfront, clearly communicated, fully transparent, so that like they could see exactly what the ask is, what's involved, and also get a sense that like, oh, I do know what I'm doing. I would be a good person to collaborate with. So like, I'm big on communication. Obviously I'm a writer. I'm an artist. And so like that part is just always very important to me. And first impressions are important, they're lasting. So
oh, sorry, go on.
Oh no, I was just saying, I think just for the sake of clarity and, just kind of feeling like, oh, here are my cards, they're on the table. That is probably the tone that I lead with, for sure.
Yeah, no, I get that. There's something I've been thinking of lately. I'm curious, maybe you have thoughts about this. Maybe this is just bullshit my brain came up with. But like, I've been thinking about lately how this business or like art in the 21st century, I don't know about like in poetry, I can't speak to that or to music really, but like definitely in like showbiz, in quotes, even though I don't really mean that. I just feel uncomfortable using that phrase. But like, I think it self-selects, if you are non-white, I think it self-selects for people who are more business-minded, because if you are like white and whimsical, and that is in quotes, you have more like pathways where some like dude is just like, oh yeah, we went to Yale together, so sure, bring him in, even if he doesn't have any kind of like, I was about to say like business mind, but like I could also say talent. But let's say you are talented, but you don't have a mind for business. People will just like bring you in. Whereas if you are non-white, there are not those opportunities, or not a lot of those opportunities. Because I've just noticed that there's a lot less whimsy in POC circles.
It does feel like the stakes are different, and it feels like what's allowed is different. I think, eccentricity is a privilege, right? Like, I feel like depending on the identities that a person holds, we're subject to different forms and levels of judgment. And different kinds of assumptions are made off the bat. And so I feel like that's something like we kind of develop an awareness of, and feel like we have to account for right from the start, which is totally unfair, right? Like that creates this dynamic where like, I definitely have like talked about the phenomenon of feeling like I often have to edit myself, that there are parts of me that, are useful in a particular, in a particular situation, and other parts that, I may need to not reveal as quickly. It's when I think about it, it just makes bums me out a lot, you know what I mean? Because I think the ability to like inhabit oneself fully, especially as an artist, is important, right? That's a big part of like just like how we exist in the world. It's just our voice and who we fully are is paramount to the work. And it's tricky, I think, to navigate what feels when it feels safe to like be fully embodied, you know, and moments when it doesn't. And like, I think part of my work is trying to just seize, just to allow my full embodiment, like of my voice and my ideas, at all times, regardless of who my, you know, what's at stake or who my audience might be.
Yeah. I mean, it's banal to say that like the decision makers or that like white supremacy structures the system, like that's banal. Like we all know that at this point. Like it's obvious that like every executive is white, or that at the very, if they're not, they're still. When I was in grad school, I was in a program that for philosophy that was supposedly pluralistic, and so like the dominant form in America is like analytic philosophy. Tell me if you know this already, but like the dominant form is analytic philosophy, and it's like terrible. It's just like it's became hegemonic, but it's like awful. It's an awful way of understanding the world. But even if you're not doing that, you still have to pay lip service to it. So like that's the way. Like, I mean, I'm sure I'm not telling you anything new, but that's what I'm saying. It's banal to say that. But I think it's interesting to like talk about the other way where like you have to like. It's one thing for like every executive to be like, I don't get that, or just want to see like movies with black paint or something like that because that's all they can understand. It's another thing to talk about how you have to like shave off parts of your personality. Well, that's the thing. I think either it like self-selects for like psychopaths. So if you are like kind of like psychopathic and just like a business person, or you have to like shave off parts of who you are to kind of navigate it and then maybe become a psychopath. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, maybe, or just kind of do it on your terms and just let the chips fall where they may, you know, like I was thinking today about, the show Lovecraft Country, which was, you know, wildly popular. Was it last year when it was on the air? Gosh, time feels like such a
last summer
made up thing. Wow, time. What is it? Who knows? So yeah, last summer, show wildly popular, doing things on television that have just truly never been done before. Really just kind of lit my imagination on fire in some really wonderful ways. And I just felt seen and met, you know, as a person in the world, as an American, as a Black person in America, in a way that I never had before. And I think the ideas that show raised are honestly not new to me, but certainly revolutionary and maybe a bit uncomfortable for America at large. And you know, recently the news came out that the show is not going to be renewed for season 2, which was surprising to many people. And then on the heels of that news, was just nominated for something like 18 Emmys, I think. So like a popular show, a critically lauded show that will somehow not have a season 2. And in my mind, you know, maybe I need to, you know, do some more critical thinking about the whole situation. I don't know. But in my mind, the only thing I can think of is that, you know, Misha Green and the other, you know, creators of the show decided we're going to tell this story exactly the way we want to tell this story. And it's probably going to make some powerful people uncomfortable, but we'll deal with that later. We're going to do this the way we want. And we'll just go from there. And I just have so much respect for that, because I think there's a world where, you know, so many shows that have high ambitions that feel a little bit dangerous, you know, take a step back from that because they don't want to ruffle feathers, because they want to ensure that they'll have a season 2, but then they're compromising their vision and perhaps watering down what their messaging is. So, I'm trying to cultivate in myself more courage in that, right? To like actually take the risk to say what I want to say exactly how I want to say it and be who I am fully in those spaces and let the chips fall where they may.
But you have like a very like, at least us talking for whatever, 10 minutes, 15 minutes now, right? It seems like you have a very like kind of sober relationship with, I mean, I hate this industry that I'm in. I love making things, right? But like, I really like it is, I've learned over the past like couple of years that it's never going to fill the void inside. and you know, I don't know if you have a void as well, but like the businessy stuff is never, I realize the accolades, whatever, even little, like, I'm talking about like dumb stuff, like a nice review somewhere, right? It doesn't, it maybe makes me feel nice for like a smidgen of a, but like, again, this could just be like the last 15 minutes, right? But like, it seems like you have a very like kind of sober, you know, you're like, I don't know about analytic understanding, or if this is just like, I guess I'm like curious, like, is this who you are, or is this just the kind of like, you know, we're just talking about like businessy stuff. So you are, you know, you have an analytic mind. This is just, again, me.
Yeah. No, I mean, I have to be a little bit analytic about it, I think, you know, like in order to be able to navigate where I want to go and what I want to achieve, I kind of have to have a sense of what the lay of the land is and what my best path forward is. I'm a pretty ambitious person and the things that I want to achieve are not, you know, they're not things that I think come easily to anybody I think any creative who wants, you know, to achieve, you know, success, whatever that looks like for them in a creative space. There's just, the pathway is riddled with obstacles. And so I feel like I have to kind of be aware of the conditions in order to be able to kind of navigate it successfully. But something that I have been thinking about a lot lately is like what the nature of success, you know, as I define it. And I think for a long time, success looked like, you know, I mean, as someone who kind of is intensely creative, but also that creativity is applied to different spaces, right? Like I'm an actor, I'm a writer, I'm a poet, I'm a director. So there's so many different ways for my voice to find expression. And I think for a long time, success to me was, it looked like being able to work consistently at high levels, being paid, like at least enough to like call myself middle class, right? Mm-hmm. Like that was like the minimum for success. And of course, like there's a tendency to want, you know, more. There's, you know, I don't think I crave, fame or anything. I value my anonymity a lot, actually. But, you know, like respect and notoriety in my chosen fields, that feels good. That feels like a solid goal. You know, being able to like kind of be comfortable financially, if not be able to like, you know, have enough to like, be secure for the rest of my life, and to also you know, give back to the communities that have given me so much or that need support. Like that's also, you know, so there's just certain lofty things that I think I've always been like, oh, once I get that, once I achieve that, I'll be happy. You know, once I get this thing, I'll feel like I've got it and I'll be happy and that'll be success. And as I've kind of like moved forward in my career, as I've, you know, worked at higher levels, as I've achieved certain things, as I've been able to like have, you know, more consistent income and like work within my field and not have a day job and all of those things, there's still, even as I move up that proverbial ladder, the sense of like, oh, well, now I want this thing that's just that far out of there. It's like a constant dangling carrot, right? And to the point where, and this is a very new revelation, I think in part because of, you know, my experience, kind of, you know, working in the space as a director and also just kind of processing all the ways in which the pandemic has, you know, shifted my perspective, is that like, I don't think it's possible to, at any level, feel successul unless you recognize what you've accomplished in a particular moment in the context of everything that's already around you. So for me, there's this moment of like sitting in the car and, you know, my movie's not made yet, right? Like what would be my directorial debut. I haven't published a book of poetry yet, right? But like I have all of these structures in my life that make my life so rich. You know, I am able to work in my field in the ways that I want to work in my field. I'm in a relationship with someone who not only do I love them, but I like them a lot. Like I enjoy them as a human being. You know, I live in a city that I absolutely love and that, you know, is a constant font of of inspiration for me. I have, a circle of chosen family and friends that I feel like I can lean on and that I enjoy. Like, there's just so much richness in my life that, like, even let's say I had, made my movie. Let's say my movie won an Oscar. Let's say I was a best-selling writer. Like, none of that would mean anything if I didn't have these other things in my life that I already have, right? And it was just this amazing moment of realizing that everything I've ever wanted, I truly already have. Everything else, all of my other ambitions on top of that, that's just icing. But in terms of, that's all really in service of cultivating the things that I already have. That's in service of being able to live the kind of life that I feel joy inside of. And then I just realized, I already have all of that joy. Everything else that comes after this is just like, it's not extra, because I just do, still have goals, and ambitions, but that's not I realize that that's not the center. You know what I mean?
I think that the ambition part is what I'm picking up on. Maybe that's the thing that I'm trying to like delineate a little bit here, where like, I'm curious, were you always an ambitious person? Because I think that, again, this is just again, like I said before, just an anecdotal theory. So there's no empirical evidence behind it at all. But just this idea of like, even I came from a very middle class background with no connections into this industry at all, right? Everything that I've built, I was going to say myself, not true, through friends helping, like being like a decent human being that's also a talented writer that people do want to help, right? Okay.
Right.
So I'm not like...
No one ushered you into the space. Yeah.
Right.
Right. Absolutely.
But I didn't do it on my own. No one does it on their own. But like,
of course,
I don't know if I had, because I didn't understand this industry and I didn't know how to do anything until I left grad school and moved to New York. Right. I don't think I had ambition in the same sense. Like what I'm picking up in you is like a drive. Like I have a drive. Like there's things I want to do and I like follow those things out with some kind of intensity. Right. Which is, I guess, what I'm trying to call ambition. But, like, it seems very, like, encompassing to you. Like, you have, like, in some way, at the very least, like, internalize some of the way that, like, this industry is and works and, like, the speak of it in a way, like, where you do, present, especially here, like, a very professional kind of front. And I'm just curious if that's, like... If that's something you have internalized, if you were always this way, like when you were a kid, were you ambitious like this? And so this is who you are, or is this something like you've made a film already, or you've been in a film already, you've been around Hollywood in some sense, and so like you have been like, oh well, to achieve the things I want to achieve in some way, and may not even be a conscious decision, right? Right? You may have just been this is what I have to do.
I think it's a little bit of both. Like I've always been an ambitious person. I've always been creative, but I've always felt like, okay, if I'm going to make something, if I'm going to be a creative person, I don't want to make things and then just like put them in a drawer somewhere or have them sitting on a drive somewhere. Like the point is to actually share it. The point of all of this art is to share it with people so that other people feel like they're not alone in whatever their experience is, right? So like, and we live in a world that's so saturated with so much media, so much content, so much, entertainment that like you have to have ambition if you actually do want to share it on any level that feels meaningful, at least as I define it for myself. So there's that sensibility. I think also, again, it just comes down to like what the nature of like the identity is that you kind of were raised within and the culture that comes along with that. Because I grew up like many, I think, Black people, hearing, you have to be twice as good to go half as far. And I think I internalized that message very early on. And the decision I made for myself was, okay, cool. I'll just be twice as good. Fine. Done. And I think that it sounds probably a little bit egotistical, right? Like, I don't think I'm just like twice as good as everybody, but I think I really absorbed that messaging, and that has perhaps contributed to like the sense of ambition that I tend to lead with. But also, like working in entertainment, I've done a lot of on-camera work, a lot of like commercial, a lot of TV, and that industry has just so many moving parts. Just so many moving parts, so much coordination needed, so much accommodation and compromise that like I feel like moving through those spaces with clarity and with kindness is paramount. Otherwise, you can't get anything done. Otherwise the whole thing grinds to a halt. And so I feel like in order to like kind of accomplish what I want to accomplish personally, but also to like serve the other projects that I am involved in or employed by, like I have to kind of put that part of myself forward, because things move quickly and things need to get done. And if I want to like be efficient and good at my job, then I have to lead with that. Otherwise it's just not going to work. Like, you hear all these stories. And I don't feel very Hollywood, right? Like I've never lived in LA. I've spent some time out there, but I've never called that my home base.
Thumbs down.
Nothing against it, but like honestly,
no, you can
like
be completely against it. It sucks.
I mean, that's what I hear from a lot of folks. I think cost of living is kind of nuts. I worry about what it's going to be like environmentally there very soon. And also I just feel more, I think I just continue to draw inspiration from living in Chicago. Like Chicago has given me so much creatively, and I don't really have a strong reason to leave that behind at this moment. So I feel kind of Hollywood adjacent, in a way that feels good and right to me. But still, even in Chicago, like even here, like I feel like, in order to like kind of be good at my job, I have to, like I have to cultivate a kind of Zen efficiency.
But I guess that's what I'm getting at though. Me. Like you said, cultivate, like, is this, I know this is like I was going to say weird question, but more like deep or more like existential, but like, is that you? Like, is it easy to put on that persona, or is it it's a struggle for me? Like, I do it when I have to, right? I schmooze if I'm at a party and I have to schmooze. I like leave the weird shit at the door, and I just try like think to myself, what does a normal human talk about? Like, they don't talk about like weird indie rock or like or like this. They don't talk about. I don't like. Normal people don't sit at a party and are like, hey, do you fear death? Whatever. Like, they don't, like, you don't go
No,
to
I'm with you. I'm with you. I truly hate small talk. I don't hate it. I just, I find it difficult because I spend my time I think about a lot of really intense things most of the time. I think about existential things. I think about political things. And it's hard to like lead with that when you're just at a social situation, especially post-pandemic, right? Like I found, as I've kind of crept back into the world, mostly kind of small group and like one-on-one situations. I don't know if I could... I actually did go to a big event the other day, but I left early. But like, I have found it like really necessary to just, as I greet people who I know and who I love, to say like, hey, we're here and here we are. But I just want to acknowledge out loud in words that we've all been through something really intense and really crazy and are processing it in ways that we don't even understand yet. So let's just like acknowledge that is in the space between us, because it feels really weird to pretend that that's not the case. Like I literally have to say that out loud because there's just a level of discomfort in pretending like that we aren't living in the circumstances that we're living in. Literally the ocean was on, or the Gulf of Mexico was on fire less than a week ago, like how is that not a part of like what is between us in any interaction? So no, I operate with a certain level of intensity that I tend, again, that's I think a part of my self-editing, because I feel like there's a time and a place for that. But it's also, just to your question, like hard to answer, because I think one thing I do know about myself is that I can be a bit of a chameleon. I don't know if you're an astrology person. This is another part that I usually edit out, but here we are. I have Gemini in my chart, and people who know anything about Gemini know that that's a very multifaceted sign. And so I feel very capable of adapting to whatever circumstances require of me pretty seamlessly. Like I'll tell you a story. I was not a very happy kid in like elementary and middle school. I got picked on a lot. And I, begged my parents to let me go to, I was in a Catholic school, still recovering. But I begged my parents to let me go to a public school for 7th and 8th grade. And I wore them down, and I, finally like got my way. And when I don't think I recognized that I was doing this in real time, but looking back, I recognized that like I really just completely shifted my entire personality. I felt like, oh, I got, picked on for being this person in 5th and 6th grade. So now I'm going to be this other kind of person. I'm going to change how I speak. I'm going to change how I dress. And it didn't feel false to me. Like I didn't feel like I was putting on a costume every day, but I know for a fact that like how I just like moved through the world was really, really different in 7th and 8th grade, because I felt like the way I would move through the world before was not serving me. It was making my life kind of a lot of suffering, And I look back and I'm kind of like, oh my gosh, I really just like transformed myself. And in a way that I don't even know that I could do now, but I just do know that I'm capable of adapting to like various environments. And also, I don't know if you have this feeling, but like, if you're ever in an environment where multiple people from different facets of your life are in the same place, like let's say you were to have a party. I'll talk about myself. Let's say I was to have a party and invite people who I know from like the writing scene or some of my theater friends and some of my director friends, a lot of my friends from like the trans community, right? Like there's suddenly, like there's some overlap, of course, but I feel like, oh my gosh, I feel like I kind of invested in slightly different aspects of myself in each of these groups. And now I don't know how to be because it's all in one place together. And all of these different groups understand me in slightly different ways because that's what I've put forward.
Yeah, that's totally foreign to me. Like if you got all like my friends from high school and grad school and college and UCB, whatever. If you got them all, the only thing I would be worried about is them interacting, because like, will my friends from grad school say like things that the other people don't, like that kind of stuff. That's my worry. But myself, I wouldn't be any different in those groups really, except for like, maybe I would talk about different things. But I think that's really interesting in that like, it was well, I mean, what were these schools like? Okay, so Catholic school, is it like, are you like one of the few POCs there? Like, what is that like? And then what's this other school? Also, let me start here. Did you grow up in Baltimore?
No, but I grew up in Southern Maryland, closer to DC than Baltimore. And I lived in Baltimore for a little while after undergrad. I know Baltimore and DC are pretty close together, but culturally and energetically, they're just very, very different places.
Sure. Yes. No, I've been to both. But like, okay, so, I mean, let's like tease this out a little bit more. What did your parents do for a living when you were growing up?
Oh, very like white collar, middle class folks. They did a couple of different things. Both of them were in real estate for a while. I think my dad finally landed in insurance. He was an insurance agent for most of my life that I can recollect. And then my mother was also a nurse for a while before she joined the Public Health Service, which is a division of the military. So then she worked in an administrative role for like public health, and was pretty like became a pretty high ranking. I think she rose to the rank of captain, which I think is maybe 1 or 2 rungs down from like Surgeon General. And I was just like, well, Mom, do you want to be Surgeon General? She was like, no, that's too much work. So no, they were, I think, when I think back about my parents, like, they were both born in Alabama, like the deep South in the 1950s and 60s. And so I think for them, like, moving beyond that was really important. Where they landed in, they were on the tail end of the Great Migration, between, the end of the Civil War and like 1975, 6 million Black people left the South and moved to literally anywhere that was not the South. And so my parents would have been at the very tail end of that. They came to DC in the 70s. And I think they were like, you know what, we're going to get set up. We're going to, they both grew up without very much, lots of siblings, not a ton of resources. And I think they were just really determined. And, we don't really talk about this as a family. So this is mostly my just kind of like contextualizing a lot of what I do know of my family's story. But, I feel like, if I were them, I would be like, you know what, I'm going to get something underneath me. And I know that my mom, in terms of where I grew up in a town called Fort Washington, which is a suburb of DC. It is mostly black, the majority black area of suburban DC, and also pretty. From what I did not understand this growing up, but a fairly affluent part of the DC suburbs. I mean, there's definitely some intense wealth around DC, like Potomac. I don't know if you know anything about that was where Beverly Hills 90210 was gonna be set. It was gonna be Potomac 20 blah blah blah, whatever the zip code is there, because it's like that. It's that crazy. It's
Isn't that the Real Housewives of the Potomac? Isn't that the?
Yeah, fully. I did not grow up in that area. That was next level. But I think I do know that in terms of just income, I think Fort Washington is one of the highest income levels for a majority black area in the United States. But I say that all to say my parents moved there on purpose. My mom was like, I'm gonna get set up, and we're gonna work, and we're gonna do this, and we're gonna. I kind of call it American dreaming, right? Like we have this promise that if we work, it's a fallacy, but if we work hard and if we really put our mind to it, we can achieve this kind of life. And I think my parents were really we're going to do that, subconscious or consciously. We're I'm going to do that. And I think, to a certain extent, they pulled that off. My sister and I grew up, had good educations, grew up in a house, you know what I mean? I could never remember being hungry. There was a lot that I think my parents did to make sure that we had what we needed in order to be set up for whatever we wanted to do in the world.
So these schools because this is the thing that I think is interesting, is that I think there is a difference about growing up in an area that's black and affluent versus growing up in an area or going to a school that's white and affluent. Difference. Knowing the people that went to who are black and went to shishi private schools in New York, around mostly white people. I think that there's a difference in how that forms you, and I'm kind of curious if you have thoughts on the way that you grew up.
Yeah, I don't have a basis for comparison, obviously, because my experience is my experience. But, again, my PG County, Prince George's County, majority black county in suburban Maryland. And so most of my, I don't know what the actual demographics are, but I recall it feeling very kind of evenly split between black students, white students, and then Fort Washington has a large Filipino community, so a lot of Filipino students and friends in my community, and it felt very even that way. But again, the presiding culture was black culture in Prince George's County, and so that's kind of that I think really rooted me. So yeah, no, I didn't have an awareness. I didn't have a feeling growing up, feeling kind of the odd person out, racially in any space. My high school was 75% black. In fact, I remember that was, again, a Catholic high school. And also it wasn't even, in Prince George's County, it's difficult to find a strong public school. I think if there were strong public schools, in Prince George's County, then we would have gone there. I don't think my parents were elitist about it at all. It was just, they were well, we want our kids to have a good education, and that is hard to come by in public schools in this county. Therefore, our only option, if we want that, is private school. And I think Catholic schools were generally less expensive than non-religious private schools. So I think honestly, just that's how that broke down. But I remember in high school, we were really proud, we were proud of the culture of our school. And I remember one year they published this kind of pamphlet to give to, prospective students, give to a bunch of 8th graders, just a pamphlet about, the school and student life and all of that. And we noticed, we noticed that in terms of how the school was visually represented, there were so many more white kids presented in this pamphlet than actually reflected the demographics of the school. And we actually brought it up. We had debates in classrooms about about this kind of representation. And we recognized on one hand that the administration was trying to maybe even out the demographics, like make it more even. But we pushed back against that because we were like, Prince George's County is mostly Black. Therefore, our school is mostly Black. And therefore, like, that should be reflected in our materials. Why are you trying to make this school more, you're like literally trying to make this school more white in an area that is mostly Black. Why? Why is that? Why is that a goal of yours? Like, Black students in this county already have limited options. If we want like a really strong education, why are you trying to take that space away from us? You know, it was a really big deal. So yeah, no, I feel like that's just always just like my culture has always been a kind of a cornerstone of like the spaces I've kind of, that are foundational to me.
Mm-hmm. What was the name of the school?
The high school?
Yeah.
Bishop McNamara High School, home of the Mustangs.
Because I'm curious about this, like, again, to like make a decision like, I don't like who I am. Like, all my decisions, all my existential decisions that I made were as a child or as a teenager were like reactive. And they weren't conscious. I was not self-aware about these decisions. It was just like at one point I was like, again, I'm saying this to you now in words, but like it wasn't like that then. It was just like I was too sensitive. And so like things would make me cry when they shouldn't, when like other people, like, you know, if like your friend like made fun of you, like I would like swell up in the back of my eyes and I would like have to like toughen up. And so like I naturally kind of toughened up, but like I didn't make that decision. I wasn't self-aware enough. I probably wasn't self-aware until like my really self-aware. I'm not like I was an automaton, but like I wasn't like really self-aware and making like real decisions until like my 20s, and then probably not till like early 30s in therapy when I was just like, oh wait, I have a choice. I can do this and this and this. But like, I'm kind of curious really about that like shift for you, because that's like, you know, being that self-aware at a young age, is interesting to me.
You know, I don't know if I was particularly self-aware, but I think I've always been very observant. I think that just comes with being a writer, you know, like in order to have something to write about, you have to notice things and you have to have an opinion about them. So I think outwardly that's always been true for me. I don't know how true it's been personally for a long time, especially because as an actor, being self-conscious is kind of and so much of my training is in acting, right? I've been an actor for a long time.
Right.
It's what I went to undergrad for. It's what I went to grad school.
I'm not good at it.
You know? And so like, there's a certain amount that I just have to like give over. If I'm going to share my truest, rawest, most potent self, then I can't second guess it. I can't judge it. You know, that is kind of the enemy of being an actor. But now that, you know, I've spent the last few years really cultivating my artistry in other spaces, in more analytical spaces, in more critical spaces, right? As a writer, poet, director, all those things. It requires a level, I think, of awareness and definitely like self-awareness, because everything I put on a page is an iteration of myself, you know? And so I have to be more deeply curious and introspective about that. I think in order to kind of like do my strongest work. But no, I am very self-conscious most of the time, which I think makes me just cautious in terms of how I present myself and what I choose to share. But like even now, I'm kind of like, how do I want to frame this? How much do I want to share about this experience? You know, because like the internet is forever. You know, like it can't really hard to go back and kind of like decide, oh, I don't want people to know about that part of me. I don't want to be misunderstood in a particular way. And now, you know, social media has made the stakes of that so much higher. Like you say one wrong thing and it's just like your entire, you know, career could be in jeopardy, even if that's who you were like 5 years, you know, 5, 10, 15 years ago. It's just it feels very perilous. And I'm also just recognizing that I'm potentially on the cusp of being a bit more visible to the public eye. And so that does make me feel a little bit more cautious about, not just in terms of fear of my, you know, what I stand to lose, but just like especially as I get older and becoming a more private person, and again, value my anonymity. And I believe in personally maintaining certain levels of privacy and mystery, because I don't feel like I don't feel inclined to I feel inclined to share the parts of myself that I think align with what I want to share with the world in terms of my artistry. I don't feel inclined to just share myself as the art. It has to be filtered through my lens,
But there's a couple interesting things. You talked about an identity as a writer. Did you have that identity? This is what I think is interesting, right? I didn't have any kind of identity as anything, even now. I'm a professional writer, okay, and I guess a professional podcaster, right? But it's not. I never I balk at that as my identity, even though that is, even though I am a very good writer. I don't immediately take that on. And I'm curious if that was your identity when you were younger, if you had be this is who I am, because that's what I think that's what I call that self-awareness. You're I am this thing, and I'm going to, and not to make this a pat linear narrative, but you said your parents moved from Alabama to, Maryland and they came with a certain kind of ambition. And I can see how that kind of framework created you. Right. Again, very linear. We don't have to go into the
sure.
As long as I say that's a reductive narrative, we can both probably agree yes. Yeah. Right.
Sure.
But having from an early age some kind of identity, I think, is interesting, and with the self-awareness that brings. And then again, I know you just said you're there's certain things I don't want to share about who I am, but whatever you're comfortable with. I am very curious. I think this change is in some way a very interesting thing that maybe set you up for this very active change you said, where you're I don't like who I am. Can I change? I'm going to be in this new school and kind of change my personality a little bit. Mm-hmm. Whatever you feel comfortable sharing about that, I think is interesting, because I think that does set you up for the rest of your life, at least, or puts you on a certain path.
I think you're right. And I think I've always been a writer. I think it took me a while to really claim that, but it's just been true of how I function in the world and contextualize my experience. It's been true since I can remember. I remember we had a lot of books in the house growing up, and some Saturdays our outing would just be to go to the public library. And I remember doing this even before I knew how to read. I still just really loved going with my mom to the I just liked being there. There's also a very cool dollhouse that I liked to kind of play with. But my mom tells me stories about sitting down with a bunch of books, most of which had pictures because I couldn't read yet. But I would see that there was text, and I would just get so upset because I couldn't read yet, and I would cry because I didn't know how to read yet. And I just even before I had that ability, connected to language as a way of understanding the world and understanding myself in the world. And then I can remember as a kid having all of these little notebooks and just writing stories just constantly. I'd play outside, but I also spent a lot of time inside making up stories. I remember when we first got a computer in our home, for the first, it was 1993, and we had this computer. We didn't even know where to put it. It sat on the kitchen table for the longest time because we were where do we put a computer? But I taught myself how to type because I decided I should transpose all the stories I'd written in my notebooks to a computer, and that's how I learned how to type. So it's just always been a very intuitive, just an intuitive thing for me, from a very young age. And I think also because I was interested in not just kind of writing, journaling, right? Writing, this is what I think about things. I was writing scenes and dialogue and making up plots and all of these things. And so that had to come from somewhere, right? To be able, even at a young age, I think, to conceive of a distinct character in your imagination and another distinct character in your imagination. I haven't looked at my brain on the inside ever, but I think that it must mean, especially people who are given to narrative work, there's a kind of wiring you have for being able to conceive not just different characters, but to be able to apply yourself to these different iterations, right? Like one thing I've learned is that like all the characters I create are just different iterations of myself. And so I think that is alive in the work that I do, but also just alive in just kind of how I move through the world, right? Like there's different iterations of myself that I have varying degrees of access to at any given moment.
But like, did you, like when you were a kid, did you literally say to yourself or out loud, I am a writer? Like, did you actively, because like I'm the same thing, right? I had these stories. I mean, I had like continuity. So I had all these like rubber figurines and stuff, and they all had different personalities, and whatever their adventures were had continuity. So something that happened to one, like in one adventure, in quotes, I don't know what you call it, right? I didn't write the stuff down really, but like carried over to the next. I mean, it's easy to like for me to be like, yes, I did that as a child, and now I professionalized it in a way, right? Mm-hmm, but like I didn't take on a certain identity as a kid, and I'm curious if you did. Did you ever say to yourself, "This is who I am"?
Not when I was very young. You know, I think in part because it felt impractical.
Sure.
You know, and I felt like, oh, I should do something normal, like be a teacher or a lawyer. I thought I was going to be a lawyer for a long time, but that's because my mom told me that I like to argue. And I didn't realize that she was being sarcastic at the time. But I do remember in 9th grade being told by an English teacher that I was an artist. And I remember that resonating, and that felt special to me. You know, it felt like, oh, I'm something that not everybody else in this room is. This person like sees that in me. And I feel like that might also be the truth. And I think that is what kind of made me feel like, okay, this is something that there's space for me to, that's a path, you know? That was the first time I kind of identified that as a path and like really started naming myself that. Not just writer, but like an artist.
I mean, like, again, like I said, whatever you feel comfortable sharing, but like, what was it about this shift in your personality that you like purposely initiated? You know, like,
oh, you mean like in changing schools and stuff, that whole thing? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's not fun being bullied or teased. But I also just felt like I feel like this is changing slowly. But I feel like there's a tendency for the larger culture, American culture, white culture, to want Blackness to be this monolithic thing, right? Mm-hmm. That like we can say that generally speaking, all Black people behave X, Y, or Z way, eat these things, buy these, whatever. And of course, that's just not the truth at all. But I think that can be internalized. And so, one of the things I was really bullied about was like, I think a lot of Black creative people actually have this experience. It's kind of fascinating. There's just like the feeling of like never, a lot of times never feeling like I was like Black enough, right? That I like, because I spoke a certain way or, listen to certain music, whatever. That wasn't, that wasn't cool, that wasn't okay. But of course, I'm not one of the white kids, so I don't really truly fit in there, or kind of have the kind of agency and ease in that space as other, So, I felt constantly on the fringes and just never validated in all of the, not just who I was, but like everything inside of me, all of the various colors and interests and ideas inside of me. I think like you always come back to that old Walt Whitman phrase, I contain multitudes. It's true of people within, various identity groups. And I think it's true within individuals. And there was nothing in my life then that was helping me value those multitudes within me. And I think, kids, adapt, really quickly to changing circumstances. And I think I just kind of subconsciously knew like, oh, being this way is not serving me. So I'm just going to be a different way because I have it inside of me. Again, I contain multitudes. So I will just switch to a different channel.
Did you ever recover that? Like, because I think it's interesting then because, like, you know, you said earlier how, like, when you're in different groups, you said you're kind of chameleon-like, right? Mm-hmm. Does that mean like that you change to be like that? Or have you been able to, as an adult, recover your multiplicity?
Yeah, I don't think it's something I ever lost. Again, I really think of it like switching a channel, you know, like there's just like I'm different now, right, than I was when I was out, you know, with my friends, you know, yesterday, having an outside meal. It's just, I think we all do that, right? Like we all play different roles in our life. This is again, me being an acting teacher, but we all play different roles in our life, right? Like you are relating to me in a way that you probably don't relate to, let's say like, a favorite uncle, right? Like you're a different version of yourself. Like it may feel essentially aligned, right? Like essentially you, but there's a different, you know, even if it's subtle, there's something that shifts in relation to whatever the nature of the relationship is that we're engaging in at the time. I think we do that on micro levels every day. And I just think, you know, I've had just experiences where I've kind of done that purposely or not purposely, on just kind of more significant levels. And so I don't feel like I ever really lost anything. I think I was just like leaning into a different sensibility. I mean, I think, you know, it's another element of like code switching, you know, again, especially as Black people, we, you know, have part of our survival in this country from the moment we got here has been cultivating an ability to change how we present in different spaces, you know, and that persists to this day, you know, like I speak a certain way in general, right? But like how I am in a room full of homies and a room full of Black people is really different, you know, than I am in a boardroom with a bunch of white people who may or may not fund my movie. You know, it's just,
sure.
It's a necessary part of survival, you know, that I think, that I and a lot of other people who have similar experiences just have access to. But it doesn't mean it's false, you know. It doesn't mean it's not us. It's just another it's just another channel, you know. And we can turn up the volume or turn it down. Right.
I hope that you didn't. I hope that wasn't what. I hope that's not what I was saying. That it's like a false self.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Oh no. But just for my own to make sure again. The fear of being misunderstood, you know, like yeah, you get it.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's this like kind of like, you are forced, if you have ambition, right? You are forced to like figure out a like way of navigating these different, I don't even just mean code switching. I mean, literally like there's a way of like being that goes beyond that I think is you can either key into it or not key into it. And I think, what I think is interesting is that you did key into it and keyed into it at a young age.
Yeah. And honestly, and I did. Again, not even like purposely. I didn't wake up one day and was just like, you know what? I'm just going to be a really different person. You know, it's very much just in response to and being in a new environment and feeling my way through that new environment. Again, really just kind of I think a lot about like the gifts that we're given on a genetic level, like what we know instinctively, and like what's passed down. Like there have been a lot of studies in recent years about generational trauma and this phenomenon where traumatic experience embed themselves or you know, imprint themselves on a DNA level. And so essentially we're passing on those experiences as knowledge, right? As instinctive knowledge. So for people who have been through some really traumatic events, the Holocaust, American slavery, all of these things, a pandemic. There's this idea that we literally embody those things, and we pass that information on a genetic level. So I think about, what gifts do I have from my ancestors that allow me to adapt to various circumstances? Who knows? Like, I haven't, I'm not a geneticist, so I haven't done those studies just yet. But I think about that. I really think about that as a gift, right? Because all of the things that we pass on, I think serve our survival, and if they don't serve our survival, then we don't survive, and we don't pass that along. So I just think about what are those gifts, and how are they alive in me?
Yeah. But I mean, what I think is very interesting is what drew me, what I wanted to talk to you in the first place is that you're very personal in your in your lyrics, right? In the poetry, in your music is very it's something I don't even let access in myself, right? I there's stuff I just kind of cut off from myself. I mean, again, I'm in therapy, so we're dealing with that. But I do think that's interesting that there is an avenue where you do allow yourself to, I mean, again, look, you could be I don't know, we've talked for, an hour, right? You could be a psychopath, and this is, you're just extremely good at it, right? I don't really know, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that, because look, I say that because I met people out here who are you're oh God, you're a very open and emotional, and then they take that, they just learned how to be open and emotional as a
1,000%.
Wear that skin, right? But I think you do, it is interesting that there is this kind of outlet where allow yourself to be vulnerable. I guess that's what I'm saying. I guess this is what's interesting to me about you, at least talking for an hour. Again, we don't know each other, right? I'm just saying talking for an hour is that you do give yourself a place to be vulnerable in public.
Wow. I'm pausing because I've never actually consciously thought about that before. Look, okay, so what do we mean by in public?
Well, a lot of what we've talked about has been the fucked up business that we're both in, and just the fucked up country we live in, and I think it's not the same, but there are similarities growing up Jewish and being black in America, growing up Jewish in a non-urban area, I should say. I'm white, I'm just outright white in New York or LA, but where I grew up, it was very obvious I'm Jewish and other, right? Okay. So
I know that dynamic, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not trying to say it's the same, but there's similarities. And you build up armor. You don't let yourself be vulnerable, because you have to again, like I said earlier, if you were a wasp and just whimsical or weird or whatever, and you want to do something and you come from money, you probably can do it. You don't need to have a certain battle plan. You don't need to toughen yourself up necessarily, because you've offloaded the responsibility of that kind of stuff to other people.
Wow, yeah.
Whereas you more than me, but both of us have had to in some way build up these kind of this armor or these walls. Again, that's a shitty metaphor, but we've had to build that stuff up. And then there are certain places, again, for me, being in therapy is learning how to be vulnerable again in public in a way. Cause I'm a comedian, right? I'm not, when I am on stage, that's part of the fucking job, and I'm bad at. If I can't do that, then I'm bad at it. And so, my wife is incredible. My wife's an incredible stand-up because she can do that stuff, right? And she does it well and easily. And I think it's interesting because your poetry is so expressive, and because it touched me in a way. I'm oh, okay. Well, there is a space that that seems to be where you can channel that kind of thing. I guess does that make sense? Again,
Yeah,
I'm putting this out as a hypothesis. I don't, you can tell me whether it's bullshit or not.
No, I think that's correct. I mean, I think my work has to be vulnerable in order to be successful. I mean, again, that's a tenet of acting. Nobody wants to go to a movie or go to a theater and see someone just like be okay for 90 minutes. That's quite boring.
I don't know, the CW has plenty of people there. Beautiful and
and impervious. Yeah, no, I think so. I think that's just part of just kind of my how I approach what I do is that it necessitates being willing to share my vulnerability with a lot of strangers sometimes, a lot of times, but it's still on my terms. You know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, I'm still in control of how vulnerable I allow myself to be. So I guess it's, again, not a straightforward answer at all, but like a little bit of both, right? Like the vulnerability is inherent because I think that's the nature of what I have to say, and I don't know what I have to offer if it's not rooted in my own vulnerability and tenderness, that's just it's a really central part of who I am. But, out in the world, it's doesn't always serve you, right? To be vulnerable. I don't like feeling, if outside of an artistic context, I don't particularly like feeling like I'm not in control in general. Mm-hmm. Or have kind of control over my emotional life and expression. I'm not sure how I feel about that yet. But I'm trying to relinquish control a little bit because, at the end of the day, you don't really have control over anything but yourself. So the idea of control is totally an illusion. Hey, I'm in therapy too. It's all good. Yeah. But I think I have learned that it feels safe for me to be my most vulnerable in my artistic spaces.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that, like, my therapy, lately has been a lot about, like, it's okay to feel like I ran from feeling bad. I would do whatever. If there was a bad emotion, I would just distract myself as much as possible. And now it's just about you know what? You're not, you're not in control. There's some stuff you're in control of. It's very little. There's very little in your life you are in control of. So
1,000%. I remember 2016 was a very difficult year for me. It was a difficult year for a lot of people for a lot of reasons. Yeah. Not just related to Trump, that was the kind of terrible icing on a terrible cake. But that was a difficult year for me for personal reasons. Far before that became our reality. My God. But I can remember I was very depressed. And I'm not a very depressed person. I tend toward optimism on any given day, but I was really life was heavy. Life was really, really heavy in a way that I just did not know how to cope with. And I can remember just I feel like I literally tried to mute the pain that I was feeling, my response to feeling sad is to just do a lot. I keep myself busy so I don't have to think about how I feel. I was always going out with friends. I was staying out until 2 and 3 and 4 in the morning and, driving too fast, and playing blasting. I mean, I like listening to my music loud anyway. I like to be able to feel my music, but disrespectfully loud, just tearing down Lakeshore Drive with the music. And I felt like I was just trying to outrun my feelings, trying to mute my feelings. If I could just keep ahead of it, then I wouldn't actually have to feel it, So that is certainly part of my experience. And I think was a way of trying to hide from trying to hide from my own vulnerability. But of course you can't, it's a losing game. It catches up with you eventually anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if you're not conscious of it, then it catches up with you in fucked up ways.
Yes. That part.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh gosh, we're way past this. I'll just say this and then we can end. But I remember when I was in grad school, I was very unhappy. I knew on some level that this is what I actually want to be doing. And I would, I used to run all the time. I know it doesn't look like it now because I just went through the quarantine and I'm trying to get the weight off. But like I used to run and weirdly, I'm like, why when I'm running, am I visualizing people shooting me or being shot with like arrows? And only later I realized I'm like, oh, that was just my brain saying like, you're really unhappy. And like, it would just constantly visualize these like people attacking me. Like, I just remember, it may have been other times. I just remember specifically like when I was running. And, and like there was like, I won't go in, like, I mean, I was just like not doing, I was like doing good work, but like not the work that they were asking me to do in grad school. Like it was high level. Like I wasn't a dummy about it, but they were just like I remember getting like a thing back right before like I was going to start my dissertation where they're like, this is good, but he's not following the directions. Why is he not doing that? And it was just like all these things where it's just like, I could not admit to myself I just didn't want to be there.
Wow. Yeah. And then it just manifested in this your subconscious was just like, we're going to interpret this for you. Wow. That's so that's, I was going to say fantastic, but it's terrible, but it's like so fascinating to me. And like, I just think our minds and our existence, and our minds, not just like our brains, right? But our whole physiological experience is so sophisticated and like is speaking to us in all of these languages that we can interpret if we actually stop to try to listen. We live in a culture that doesn't encourage that.
Yeah.
Does not encourage introspection, does not encourage slowing down or listening to yourself or your intuitive voice. Yeah. It really is such an act of resistance to like take the time to do that. That's so fascinating. Wow.
It actually seems like a nice place to end. Also, I've kept you 10 minutes longer than I said I would. So thank you so much.
It's all good. It took us a while to get like set up with tech. So not a problem at all. What a great conversation. I was not expecting just what the nature of this conversation has been. It was how I feel like honestly more, speaking of vulnerability, more vulnerable in this space with someone new to me than I generally allow myself to be. But I found this conversation like really, really intriguing. And I just feel kind of seen in a way that again, I'm not used to for such, new interactions. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad you reached out and really enjoyed this conversation.
And we'll see you next time. Bye. Bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh, bye, oh.